Hey, my name is Gladius. Welcome to my complete FURINA guide. After frame-by-frame analysis, I ran simulations on all of FURINA's kit and even used resources from the CN community to bring you the best FURINA build all the way from C0 free-to-play to higher Constellations. I will be going over her kit, weapon options, best artifacts, constellations, and team building. Without further ado, let's get right into it. FURINA can take on both Uxia and Numa alignment. She can swap between the two alignments with her charge attack, and she uses her normal attack to proc their respective alignment damage. This is the first character in Fontaine to have both alignments, and I have a feeling she'll be the only one. It's meant to deal with certain Fontaine mechanics, and not really a significant source of damage. FURINA's elemental skill summons Hydro companions that assist her in combat. In her default Uxia alignment, she summons 3 companions, a seahorse, an octopus, and a crab. All 3 of which will constantly follow you and deal damage to enemies even if FURINA is not on the field. They are basically mobile turrets. Right before they initiate their attack, they will all consume FURINA's whole party's HP steadily until the 50% threshold, at which point they still attack but do less damage. When you use FURINA's charge attack to swap alignments to Numa, all 3 companions are swapped to a single stationary companion that heals your on-field character, very akin to the likes of Kokomi's jellyfish, which means only one character can be on field and healed at the same time, unless of course you're in co-op mode. This healing mode does no damage, but will also stop consuming your party's HP. FURINA's ultimate is an 18-second buff that gives damage bonus and incoming healing to FURINA's whole team. This buff stacks over time and gets increasingly more potent. It has a maximum of 300 stacks, and at max level she provides up to 75% damage bonus and 30% incoming healing for all her allies. For every 1% of HP lost or gained by any team member during this 18-second window, you get 1 stack. So to reach the maximum stack of 300, all FURINA's teammates, including herself, on average will need to have lost or gained a total of 75% of their HP. It doesn't matter if you lost more or gained more as long as the total fluctuation is 75%. For example, losing 75% of their HP is the same as losing 40% and getting healed for 35. Either way, you can reach the maximum stack. To keep it simple, FURINA pretty much got HP consumption covered with her 3 companions, draining around 46% of everyone's HP in that 18-second window. You just ideally want a healer to heal everyone back up reliably and repeat that process. FURINA is a very versatile character that can take on up to 3 roles. First, she is an off-field damage dealer. Second is that she can switch to also being a healer if you need her to be. And finally, she is a damage booster. Each of these roles are rarely given to a limited 5-star character, let alone somebody that can do all 3. To truly understand how to build and play FURINA, we have to understand how well she fulfills each role. She is very competitive as an off-field damage dealer, with almost 100% of her damage coming from her elemental skill. Compared to other limited characters at C0 with similar single-target off-field abilities, FURINA definitely holds her own weight. Her off-field damage has a very high uptime and consistency without any trigger conditions like normal attacking. All this do come at a price of draining everyone's HP at the rate of 2.6% per second, and if party members are not healed above 50%, the draining stops, but FURINA also does significantly less damage. When FURINA is swapped to Numa alignment, which is the healing mode for her elemental skill, she doesn't have the best healing output, mainly due to it being single target healing. For being an elemental skill, it does have the advantage of not requiring the use of ultimate to heal, and not limiting you to stand in a circle like Bennett. The healing mode of her skill will most likely be used in Overworld for quality of life. FURINA's buffing capability is decent as well, given you fulfilled the healing requirements to reach the maximum stacks of her buff. Comparing to other full-time team buffers, her real value is that she brings a significant amount of damage herself and how universal her damage bonus is. Looking at a few examples of other buffers, they all come with some form of restriction. Bennett requires you to scale with attack and stay in his circle. Kazuha requires a bit more field time and screen time. And Baruzan is C6 and only works with animal damage. In summary, FURINA's true value comes from taking a sub-DPS and a team buffer role at the same time, while taking very little on-field screen time. You mostly just press E into Q and let her team do the rest. So it's no surprise that as long as you bring the adequate healing, FURINA is super flexible with team building. Let's talk about weapon options. FURINA is a Hydro sword user. I will be listing and comparing the most competitive weapons with 5 stars at R1 and 4 stars at R5 for best visual comparison. FURINA's signature weapon has about 15% more damage output than the best 4-star options, but has significantly more drip. It looks more like a cane than a sword, which really fits FURINA that's always putting on a show. Jade Cutter and the Battle Pass weapon Wolffang has a slight advantage, but isn't exactly free to play. If you do have access to these weapons, you can definitely consider them. One note about Wolffang is that it stops stacking when you switch FURINA off-field, but at least she can fully stack it with her EQ combo and retain 10 seconds of that extra crit after being switched off. The Festering Desire is the best free-to-play option, but it was a limited event weapon handed out 3 years ago. I'm pretty sure not everyone is gonna have this. The Favonius Sword is a surprisingly competitive weapon at any refinement. Do know that this is assuming you can utilize all the energy benefits. When you're running double Hydro teams, chances are you'll be overcapped on energy using a Favonius Sword. Nilou's signature weapon, Key of Kashnasut, is quite decent to use on FURINA if for some reason you have this sword but not Nilou. It gets even more value when FURINA is utilized in Vaporized teams or Dendril teams. The sword you get from Fontaine Fishing is also quite good at R5, but being an energy recharge focused weapon, I still prefer to use Favonius Sword instead to also give her team more energy. And my recommendation stops here. Other 5-star or 4-star swords are not that compatible with FURINA, mainly due to her scaling off HP, not attack. Let's talk about artifact sets we want for FURINA. Golden Troop is FURINA's best artifact and is not even close. It complements her off-field playstyle with a massive 70% damage bonus, and only other alternative I would consider are the 2-piece combinations of either HP, energy recharge, or hydro bonus. The 4-piece Marushosei Hunter set only starts stacking when you're on field, and you lose the stacks after being switched off more than 5 seconds. Given how FURINA is played mostly off-field, you can see how this is not ideal for FURINA. I know some people may be looking at the 4-piece Vurukasha's Glow as an alternative to FURINA, but realize that HP consumption mechanic does not equate to taking damage. There's a fundamental difference coded into the game. Much like other Fontanian characters, FURINA actually cannot proc this effect on her skill. 4-piece Tenacity of Millilith can be argued to have good use cases where majority of FURINA's team damage comes from attack scalers and FURINA is taking more of a supportive role. But as you'll find out, FURINA actually has very little restrictions to team building, so the most universal way to build FURINA is just to focus more on her personal damage. For energy recharge, we want to aim for at least 140% to 160% at minimum, which will be enough for a few scenarios, and especially if they overlap. These scenarios are: number 1, having another Hydro teammate; number 2, consistent monster kills, especially AoE fodders; number 3, having her Constellation 4; and lastly, if there's more than one Favonius on the team, including herself. Energy recharge under 140% is not recommended. If you're extremely adamant on guaranteeing FURINA getting her ultimate recharge in every possible scenario, which I personally wouldn't, you'll likely want to aim 180 to 220% for these extreme cases. Now with that information, let's determine what main stats and substats to go for on your artifact. For Scent, you want HP percent or energy recharge. Depending on your weapon and substats, remember, the goal is to have at least 140% ER. For Goblet, you want HP percent. Given how much damage bonus she buffs herself in tandem with Golden Troop artifact bonus, a Hydro damage Goblet will need to have 3 or more substats than an HP Goblet to be competitive. For the Circlet, crit rate or crit damage will be the best. Choose one of the two to balance out a 1:2 ratio for crit rate, crit damage. If you manage a good and balanced crit ratio even using an HP percent Circlet, it can also be very competitive, being only 2 substats behind a crit Circlet. For substats, you'll be mostly looking at crit, HP percent, and ER. While crit is still the premium substat to look for, but is a lot closer than you might expect, your main focus should be getting as many substats as possible instead of just strictly looking at pieces with double crit. Crit rate and crit damage is not the end-all be-all for an HP scaler like FURINA. Let's talk about team building for FURINA. For the longest time in Genshin's history, there's been a dilemma. Is it necessary to bring a healer? Because not all content are difficult enough to necessitate one. And when you don't bring a healer, your characters slowly die over time and you have no way to sustain. It's not like we have a lifesteal stat on our artifact. And when you do bring a healer, they typically heal too much and overheal, leaving you to think you could have given that team slot to someone else. And FURINA is here to change that. She makes very good use of otherwise overhealing and converts that into her doing more damage and buffing the whole team. So no more undecisiveness, just bring a healer. And as a side note, Prototype Ember now qualifies as half a healer. As you probably have guessed already, FURINA being an off-field damage and support, being flexible with team building will be her greatest strength. She will be an upgrade for most pre-existing team cores that already bring a healer, which is not a small feat. Now, it's impossible for me to list every single team variation, but I'll try my best to outline most archetypes and team cores, along with their strengths and weaknesses of having FURINA on the team. I will be general with this section, so don't take the information as exact science. First one I'll talk about is where FURINA does more personal damage compared to her other teams. A double Hydro or mono Hydro team with a VV animal support. This team has Hydro Resonance, a good amount of Hydro Particles, allowing FURINA to build less ER and more damage. An animal grouper like Kazuha or Venti also makes FURINA's skills better with AoE. Next, we have a Hu Tao double Hydro team core. Unfortunately, FURINA's Hydro application isn't good enough to solo support Hu Tao Vapes. FURINA can replace Xinqiu or Yelan, but not both. Due to how synergistic Yelan and Xinqiu is already with each other, with Hu Tao, you won't see a huge improvement with FURINA on the team. Raiden Shogun can be a good driver for double Hydro powerhouse consisting of FURINA and Yelan. In this specific team, you really want an animal healer with VV instead of a generic healer. Now we have a Cryo team core with either Ayaka or Wriothesley and Shenhe. Best options for healers are Kokomi, or an animal healer with VV, or even a support with Prototype Ember and a healing circlet, as damage taken should be minimal from enemies being frozen. A big winner with FURINA on the team is a Sino team. FURINA won't affect his aggravate reactions, all the while giving free hyper blooms and a nice damage bonus. The same could be said about an Alhaitham spread team as well. The challenge for both is to find a good AoE healer to maintain FURINA's HP consumption, but you can always resort to using Prototype Ember and a healing circlet on Nahida. FURINA can also improve an animal hypercarry team core with either Wanderer or Xiao. With no restrictions of requiring normal attacking like Xinqiu or Yelan, FURINA's unconditional off-field damage gives Wanderer and Xiao the freedom of using more charged attack and plunging attacks respectively. This will be a slight to moderate improvement over using Yelan. The biggest winner of all by taking on FURINA as a teammate will be Noelle. With the addition of FURINA, Noelle just went up 2 tiers. FURINA's low field time requirement and damage bonus complements Noelle's kit perfectly. With Noelle already being a shielder, her party-wide heal always felt a little redundant and ends up overhealing. With FURINA, we can finally put that into good use. Noelle already brings good AoE damage. With FURINA assisting her in single target scenarios, they really got each other covered in their respective shortcomings. With team core being FURINA, Noelle, and Goro, you have way more freedom for the 4th slot than any other FURINA team, because Noelle got you covered on healing. Ito will do more damage in place of Noelle, but at the sacrifice of requiring another healer. Finally, I'll talk about the most anticipated meta team comp, which is FURINA and Neuvillette. This pairing will excel in almost every situation, be it single target or AoE. With an animal support or healer with VV, this comp will be the ceiling for DPS for a while. And other team slots, you'll be looking for animal unit with VV or another support of a different element type, with one of them being able to heal or use Prototype Ember. I will start off by saying FURINA is fully functional and amazing at C0, having condensed role of off-field damage dealer and a damage support at the same time. She will not need any of her constellation to secure her spot as being one of the most impactful team players of all time. But that's not to say her constellations are not good. In fact, quite the opposite. She has the most insane and broken constellations I've seen for both Archons and limited characters. Due to her constellations not excluding any part of her kit, be it her own damage or buffing capabilities, and the fact that she's also a benefactor of her own buffs as well, these constellations have a compounding effect with each other, making her absolutely broken. To do FURINA's constellation justice, we have to analyze them separately by function and damage. Much like herself, she is multifaceted. FURINA's party-wide damage and incoming healing buff gets greatly amplified by her first 3 constellations, with C1 giving the biggest increase for that buff. Then we look at her own damage output as well, and we immediately see that C2 massively increases her own damage. A 42% increase from C2 alone is already on par with the best early constellations ever in Genshin, which is Raiden Shogun C2, also being 42%. Then we really think about the spilt over damage buff the whole team gets as well, being 50% higher on average with C1 and C2 combined. Her teammates are going to do roughly 17% more damage as a result, which is quite insane, being on par with Nahida's C2. I don't know how else to describe FURINA as C2 other than simply broken. FURINA is essentially getting Raiden C2 and Nahida C2 for the price of 1. FURINA's next notable constellation will be her C6. For a 10-second window after she casts her skill, her normal attacks are now infused with Hydro and start dealing respectable damage for 6 hits. On the surface, this Constellations look quite similar to Yelan and Nahida C6, trading a few seconds of on-field time for extra damage, but it goes much deeper. FURINA now becomes a bona fide healer, allowing her basic attack to also give the whole party a heal over time effect when used in her Uzia alignment. FURINA's biggest restriction was to require a healer on her team to function optimally, and the biggest part of C6 is to remove this requirement, freeing up one team slot for FURINA. It cannot be understated how valuable this can be in certain team comps. If you want my recommendation for investing more into FURINA's power, my priority will be C2 over just having C1 over her weapon. Don't get me wrong, C6 is insane but way too deep. Well, good for you if you can afford that. Her signature weapon has infinitely more drip, so who am I to tell you to get Constellations over the weapon, right? Alright, that concludes my complete FURINA guide. If you enjoyed and want more videos like this, make sure to drop a sub and a like and don't miss out. My name is Gladius, thank you for watching, until next time.